Why did gold become money? That's what we're going to talk about this week on Milkshakes Markets and Madness. I think most longtime followers know that I am a big believer in gold, and I think it should be the cornerstone of just about every portfolio. But why is that? Why should gold be the cornerstone of every portfolio? Well, I think a lot of people also know that it's a good store of value and it never tarnishes and it's been around for a long time. But it also has a history as money. But why? Why did it become money? And I think it's a really interesting question to think about. Because while I think that gold, again, is an important part of an overall portfolio, and I certainly want to hold it as a strategic asset, I'm not as dogmatic and religious about it as some people are. And the reason many people are is because of its history as a monetary asset. And I think regardless of whether you're dogmatic about it or not dogmatic about it, it's a good thing to understand at least where that opinion comes from. So a lot of people know that gold did become money, but why did gold become money? And I saw a presentation several years ago, which I thought came at it from a really interesting angle. And it kind of came at it from a scientific angle rather than a purely economic angle. So I thought that's what we would discuss today. And I kind of put together a presentation that kind of explains this in greater detail. And for some reason, I don't know if it's coming up for you guys or not. Oh, there it is. Okay. So why did gold become money? And we're going to look at it from a scientific standpoint rather than purely an economic standpoint. But before we get into that, I want to remind everybody about Monetary Metals. I think many of you know that I joined the board of Monetary Metals a few months ago. Monetary Metals is a company that's very much related to this topic because we're talking about gold as money today. And Monetary Metals is one of the few companies that I know of out there, maybe the only company out there that is actually providing a way to use gold as money today. And not only for an individual to use gold as money, but they're actually putting it to productive use in the world economy. And I think if you believe that gold is money, and if you think gold should be money again, officially, then you should probably support the effort to make it so. And this is a free market effort on behalf of the people at Monetary Metals to bring gold back into the monetary system. And by doing so, it allows you to own gold and earn a yield on it, just like you would in another productive endeavor in a non-gold asset. And they do this by, you deposit your gold with them, and then they find people in the world who need to use that gold. And then they can use your gold. And in exchange for using your gold, you get paid a yield. Now, I know some people are saying, well, I don't want to have any kind of encumbrance against my gold. Well, this is not for the gold that you have stashed away in a vault for a rainy day somewhere. But if you want to add gold to your portfolio, but add it in a different way than just vaulted gold that costs you a management fee or a storage fee every year, this is a great way to do it. Not just because it's a different way to own gold and it provides you some diversification, but it also provides you an income on some of your holdings that otherwise would actually be a drag from a storage cost basis. But really more than that, the numbers speak for themselves. I think anybody who owns gold knows that if you add gold to a portfolio, it increases the overall return and it increases the Sharpe ratio and it decreases the overall standard deviation or the level of risk. And this chart right here just basically shows different various scenarios where you add gold to a portfolio, some on a neutral level, some on an aggressive level. But the purple line is showing when you add gold to a portfolio and gold with a yield. And all it does is it just makes the overall risk return profile even more beneficial than if your gold did not have a yield associated with it. So in any case, I encourage everybody to go to monetarymetals.com/Santiago and check it out and consider placing some of your gold in that scenario. I do it myself and I add to it every month and think it's something worthy of consideration. But let's get back to the discussion at hand. What is money? Now, one of the questions that we've discussed many times on this program and debated is what is money? And, one view is that it is a token demanded from the king in tribute. The other view is that is it a good that is derived by the free exchange of individuals in an economy. Now, for the libertarian or free market thinking people, oftentimes this is the definition that is most liked. It's the most marketable commodity, which extinguishes debt, which has been chosen by free market forces. But we all know that governments are a fact of life. The fact that we don't like them doesn't necessarily change this fact. And so we always have to at least sort of be open to the possibility that the government is going to have some opinion on what money is. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. Today, we are going to talk about the free market chosen money, because that is where gold has come from. And that is why gold has been considered money in some form or another for thousands and thousands of years. But again, why is that? Why does gold become money? Now, I think some longtime gold bugs have probably seen this presentation before or something similar to this before. I think they will still enjoy hearing it again. And for the non-gold bugs out there who have never kind of understood why gold was ever money to begin with, it might be something new that you learn. So let's kind of get into it. But essentially, at the end of the day, something has to be money. If we're going to use something at money, it has to be something. Otherwise, and it has to be a common thing that everybody uses. Otherwise, we're left to bartering, which, is everybody knows, is an extremely inefficient system. So what is that something going to be? Well, what are things made out of? Things are made out of the elements, right? If something is going to be money, then that thing has to be found somewhere on this table. And this has all the known elements in the universe. So whatever we use as money has to be found on this table. And it's a big list, right? This gives us 118 different choices of what could be money. But the interesting thing about it is that for thousands of years, humans from all over the world, from vastly different cultures, different backgrounds, different continents, have repeatedly determined that one of these elements to be the most marketable and most widely demanded out of all of them. And as a result, it has become a store of wealth and a medium of exchange all over the world for almost all of history. And it wasn't that long ago that much of the world was on a gold standard. But again, why? Why did they all choose this? Why did they choose gold? Well, again, if we go back to this list, it has to be somewhere on this. And so what we can do is we can go through the process of eliminating certain things that aren't a good form of money, and we can eventually end up with what could possibly be a good form of money. So if we start eliminating things that wouldn't work, that's a good place to start. So all of these highlighted here in green, they have a big advantage, and that is that they are very stable. You kind of want your money to be stable. You don't want it to be wildly fluctuating all over the place. So these have something going for them. However, there's a big drawback to these here, and that is that they're gases. So I guess we could all walk around with glass jars full of, money, but each time we open the jar to go buy a quart of milk or a pair of shoes, we're all going to be in danger of going broke as our money escapes into the atmosphere. So, those just don't really work, and we can clearly eliminate them from the list. Next, we've got a couple other elements that would work. So what about these two highlighted in blue? The problem with these is that they're liquids. So again, we could carry them around in a jar or some kind of a container, but how smart is this, right? What would happen if we actually dropped the money and it's soaked into the carpet or the yard? How are you going to pick it back up? So, those aren't great forms of money either, and we can probably delete them from the list. Okay, let's keep going down this list here. As we get to this one, now this one, I guess we could consider lithium highlighted here, right? Lithium, let's see, right here in red. There's just one problem with using lithium as money, is it's very reactive to this very important thing called oxygen. And it can lead to a huge fire, which it leads to it exploding. So I don't know about you, but I think money that spontaneously combusts doesn't really rank high on my list of attributes that I would want as a preferred monetary option. It kind of makes it also kind of the fact that lithium, you know, has this effect when it comes into contact with oxygen, and doesn't really make me feel great about carrying around laptops and cell phones. But this is the world in which we live, so I guess we deal with it. Let's see, what else could we use as money? Well, first of all, we can clearly check that off the list, right? Now let's see, what else could we use as money? Now these pop up, right? These pop up, and it turns out that many of these are dangerous as well, because they are reactive, right? And they react to one thing or another. And it means they either rust or they corrode or they fall apart. Some are even toxic and some are even poisonous. So clearly those are not going to work as money. So we can cross those off the list, and, we do not want to use those. So you can see our choices for money are rapidly starting to decrease. But let's focus on these down here. How about all these down here that are highlighted here at the bottom in orange? These have some really cool names like Promethium, Einsteinium, some other things I can't even pronounce. There's just one problem with these, and it's a minor problem, admittedly, but there is a problem, and that is that they're radioactive. I don't know about you, but radioactive money does not sound like a good solution. Now, some people may consider the fiat money that we have now just as dangerous as radioactive money, and some may even choose this money over the fiat money. But again, radioactive money is not an ideal solution. So I think we can cross all of this radioactive money off of our list. So again, our list is rapidly shrinking down of what could possibly be money. So the other thing that we have to do when we're considering money, right? Now, contrary to what many central bankers will probably tell you, another preferred characteristic of a good form of money is that it be rare. You don't want it to be so plentiful that this can be dropped at will from helicopters, or else money loses value very quickly. So if we're talking about a free market, one in which governments aren't involved, you can understand why you wouldn't pick something that was so abundant that it could be dropped from helicopters, because you would want the money to retain value. And so when we continue to look at choices that we have of what could be money, all of these elements here that are highlighted in purple are extremely abundant. They could literally be dropped from helicopters. So they're not going to hold their value very well. And as such, they're going to lose out in the game of what is the best form of money when we're choosing it from the elements. Okay, we're getting closer now. We're getting closer. So that leaves us with these remaining 7 precious and semi-precious metals. So now we're starting to get down to the heart of the matter here. Okay, so you don't want money to be so abundant that it loses value, but you also don't want money to be so rare that you can't get any. That would cause a depression. And you therefore can look at these elements, and the ones that are too rare can be eliminated. So as an example, osmium. Osmium only comes to Earth via meteorites. So that's not a great choice as far as using it as money. So, I think we can remove that. Keep going. Now we're down to like 5 or 6 now, right? It's getting closer and closer. So that leaves us with this. Now we've got ruthenium, rhodium, palladium, and indium. The problem is these weren't really an option for much of history, because they weren't even discovered until the 1800s. So it would be really hard for Moses to be walking around with, rhodium or ruthenium in his pocket if it hadn't even been discovered for another several thousand years. So those, again, can be eliminated. And when we do that, voila, we're down to 3 elements left: silver, platinum, and gold. Now, these are the precious metals that most people are familiar with. Now, Silver has actually been money used widely throughout history on several different occasions, and it is often referred to as poor man's gold. But there is one problem with silver, and as anybody who has ever held a silver coin or owned silver jewelry or some kind of silverware, you know that silver tarnishes. So while it is a better choice than most, it is still not perfect, and it's not the best out of all the other choices. So unfortunately, silver gets taken off the list. Now, what does that leave? Well, we've still got platinum, right? But if you lived in the ancient world and you found a big deposit of platinum and you wanted to transform it into coins, you would either need a futuristic technology or a time machine, because the melting point of platinum is 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And the technology did not exist back during ancient times to heat platinum to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit to get it malleable into a liquid malleable form that they could then put into coins. So clearly, again, platinum fails the test. And what does that leave us with? Da, 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 da. There's only one thing remaining. Now, gold melts at a much lower temperature rate than platinum, and as such, it was much easier for early human civilization on Earth to work with it. And so that is how we end up with gold as the only remaining option and the best form of money out of all of the choices freely available from the elements. Now, it's not just this, but in addition to this, it satisfies many problems and it satisfies many needed principles. So at the end of the day, gold is rare, but it can still be found in places like rivers and streams. It's indestructible and it doesn't tarnish and it doesn't decay. It's dense, which means it doesn't take up a whole lot of space, and it's easily malleable and it's easily divisible, and it's very fungible, which means it can be easily coined and broken up into smaller pieces, and its physical beauty and desire has been documented for literally thousands of years. So simply put, gold has become money because it is not a gas, it's not a liquid, it's stable, it's non-reactive, it doesn't blow up, and it doesn't kill you. It's rare and it can't be destroyed. So from a scientific perspective, gold is the only choice of money to be chosen by the free market, or at least the best choice that could be chosen by the free market. Now, does this mean that we are going back to a gold standard? No, this does not mean that we are necessarily going back to a gold standard, but it also means that we can't say for sure that we're not going back to a gold standard, as it explains very neatly and concisely why gold has been money before and why it satisfies many of the properties needed to be a good form of exchange. But this is the last thing that any central bank or government would want, because it forces them to balance budgets and live within their means, and they can't make as many promises, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's possible that market forces will take this choice out of their hands. And if that happens, it's possible that the one element that market has chosen as money for thousands and thousands of years could be that same element that is chosen as money again. And, you know, at the end of the day, while this presentation is meant to be a kind of an entertaining look at the history of gold and why it ever became money in the first place, the best jokes always have a little bit of truth to them. So can this be ruled out? No. And I think anybody who automatically thinks that 100% can be ruled out is doing themselves a disfavor by thinking that way. Doesn't mean you have to believe this with everything. It doesn't mean you have to plan on this, but it means you should also not completely rule it out either. Now, that's it for this presentation. If you liked this presentation and this is the type of stuff that we talk about on this channel. We talk about the intersection of geopolitics, financial markets, and the madness of crowds. And we also write about this frequently on our research service, which is Santiago Capital Research. That can be found by going to research.santiagocapital.com. And this is the point where I tell you to hit that like button and subscribe. I am told that that actually helps our channel do better, even though I never really thought about it in those terms. I appreciate all of you showing up every week and listening. I hope you found this to be entertaining. And if you have not yet subscribed to our research service, I encourage you to go over there and do that as well. Now, this is the week before Thanksgiving, so I'm going to be traveling next week. There will not be an episode next week. So I wish you all a great Thanksgiving with your family and your friends. And if you're traveling, stay safe. See you next week. Bye-bye.